Good evening and welcome. It is 5:30, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to our regular board meeting of Vancouver Public Schools. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few thoughts and reminders for our large audience here. We want our boardroom to be a welcoming, safe space for all and any of our community members and guests. As this is a business meeting, we do expect those in attendance to conduct themselves in a respectful way. We would ask that you do not interrupt this meeting, and if there is an immediate need that you have, such as an audio concern or question, please move to the back and let one of our staff members know. As a reminder, there is a designated space for any video recording and/or media. We will now get started with our business meeting and the items on our agenda. First, we'll do roll call. Director Barrows. Here. Director Decker. Here. Director Smith. Here. Director Zavala. Here. And I'm also here. Tonight is a different meeting. We have a public hearing for our fiscal budget for the 24-25 school year. So once we get to the regular business portion of our meeting, we'll be recessing, holding a public hearing around the budget, and then reconvening. So that's different. If you are signed up for public comment, there are two separate sign-up sheets. One is for the public hearing for the budget, and then the other is for our regular public comments. So with that, we'll get started with the agenda.
So the first part of the agenda is our national anthem, and so we'll pull that up. That is brought to you today by Geyser Middle School via recording under the direction of Ann Medeline with the strings. So, and at the end of the meeting, we'll have another performance by them. So I invite you to rise if you're willing and able, and we'll do the national anthem. I think there might have been a cameo performance by Principal Delgadillo conducting that performance. And I think Miss Medeline might have been in the orchestra. So that was kind of cool and a nice surprise. They did a great job. So anxious to hear what they have at the end of the meeting. For the superintendent's report this evening, I'll share my screen. So the August meeting is typically follows a board workshop, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's been a full day for the board. Thank you for giving your time and energy and focus all day long. We have been ramping up our messaging. Parents received notifications this week of upcoming things, staying in, just paying attention to different things that are coming up. And then also our teams are ramping up their preparation. So things happen really quickly, and we have different work groups that are coming back to work with different assignments. So always a lot of excitement in August. Also, I wanted to highlight Dave Bennett's here today, and some of our DROs that participated. We had an active shooter drill yesterday in partnership with Vancouver Police Department and a lot of first responders from the community. They actually did 2 different drills, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Evergreen School District came over too as a part of that. Always lots of learning, always a situation like we never want to be in that situation. So we try to drill for the worst scenario and learn from that. So thanks to Dave's leadership for making that happen yesterday and the participation. I know just in talking with some of our DROs coming in that they have some ideas around what we can do or what that might look like in the future. So as you mentioned, Director Sproul, we do have the August meeting is also our budget consideration meeting. And so there will be a public hearing. You won't see my typical budget report. This is the first time in 11 meetings, I think, that I haven't given that. I'm going to defer to Brett to walk you through some of the details. And then each director does have a board budget packet that is also available for their review and questions. So I know you've had access to that before. And then finally, wanted to come back to the board workshop. We discussed 4 main things and a lot of stuff in between, but one of them is the strategic plan and progress monitoring, and that was kind of woven throughout the morning. We also heard about special education service plans. We talked a lot about hate and bias, the speech that our students are experiencing in our schools and our community, and how we might be better at disrupting that. We also did some policy consideration discussion around cell phones. And we had a wonderful lunch with some of our advisory representatives, including Tracy from the staff advisory that joined us for discussion just about why they serve in that role and some of the ideas that they have for the future. So I felt like it was a really great day. And I'll just give space if any of the directors want to comment on this. We talked about kind of these topics coming back over the course of the year. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I just want to thank all of the district office staff that did so much work around today's workshop. We had presentations from special services and from our restorative justice groups and so many others. I'm blanking out right now, but it was amazing. And our curriculum directors presentations. We have such talent in this district, and it's wonderful to be reminded of that. It was a little long, but it was worth it to see all that work that's been done on our children's behalf.
I'll just add that it is always a big first day back after a month break, but it's a really good reset where we come together and in all of our various different capacities and roles, anchor ourselves in the priorities for the year. So it feels good to kind of come back together, collaborate, get on the same page. And I think this is the first year we've had a strategic plan that's from this team that we're all building off of. And so that's really exciting. I mean, we passed it last fall and we've definitely been working on it, but to see now goal setting and work plans driven directly from that strategic plan, it feels very cohesive and hopeful for the year.
I think your comment about hopeful is exactly kind of the takeaway that I had, because I think prior to us all kind of convening today, I think there's, we collectively and individually have, worries about things this year, just the impact of the budget cuts on, our students and families and staff. Just impacts of other things kind of going on in our world, in public education. And I think seeing all of the positive work that's being done in the district and kind of the things that are being set up for this next year really leaves me hopeful. Specifically, I'm excited to see how the special services plan kind of rolls out and takes on within our staff, and excited to see that work, because I think our all of our students deserve opportunities and access. And I think we have a really great plan. And I know our board is really excited about that and really supportive of the work that our special services department is doing. And so we're happy to see that come to fruition and be rolled out. So.
I just really enjoyed the day today. It's a lot of hard work and a lot of hard conversations. It's also like, I think what we're saying is very hopeful. I feel like very centered in what we're doing. And so I think I always enjoy our workshops and our retreats, even though they're here. We don't go, no, we stay here. So it's great. So, yeah.
I don't know that I have anything profound to add. You guys have all said it really, really well. But I do want to just reiterate my gratitude for the work of the staff, because I was just very impressed from beginning to end. All the presentations that were given. I'll be honest, it's not easy to come back in August. I'm not ready for summer to be over, but you guys have helped me find a little bit motivation for starting the year and being excited about the work ahead. So.
That's all I have for the superintendent's report this evening. So thank you for your thoughtful comments.
So it being summer, we don't have recognitions, students or staff, so we're going to go right into our public comment. Are there public comments signed up for our regular public comment? Okay, I'm just going to make the executive decision not to read this long script. Just, well. So we have no audience participation for our regular board meeting, and I'm going to skip over the script, which you've all heard many times. The next item on our agenda is the approval of minutes. And this is from our, it says July 13th, but I'm assuming it's July 9th. Oh, yes. So I'm sorry. I was looking about July 9th, regular board meeting, which, so do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I will take it to a vote. Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
Director Smith,
Approve.
Director Zavala,
Approve.
and I also approve. So moving into our consent agenda, there's two parts to this agenda. And these typically we review all of our contracts and consent agenda items in the committee of the whole meeting the month prior. Because we take most of the month of July off after the regular board meeting. These were reviewed via briefing, and directors were able to ask direct questions. So do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
All motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Are there any, excuse me, since we didn't review these, are there any additional questions this time? Conversation? Okay. We can go ahead and take it to a vote. Director Zavala,
Approve.
Director Smith,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
and Director Barrows. And I also approve. So, for our regular business, the first item is a recommendation to conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy 6020, system of funds and accounts in the 6,000 series for management support.
Great, thank you. So the revisions to policy 6020 are to update the permissible uses of the transportation vehicle fund and the capital projects fund. For the transportation vehicle fund, the revisions would allow the district to use funding towards the electrification of our bus fleet, which is allowed under RCW 28A.160.130. And for the revisions to the capital projects funds, those revisions simply clarify the permissible uses of that fund in alignment with the WASDA model policy.
Do I have a motion?
I move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Are there any comments or additional questions about this policy update? Okay, we'll take it to a vote. Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
Director Smith,
Approve.
and Director Zavala.
Approve.
Okay, and I also approve, so policy passes. And this is now the part in our meeting where we are going to recess and move into a public hearing to review our 2024-2025 budget. And I just want to make sure I do this correctly. So I'm recessing the board meeting for the purpose of holding a public hearing. The hearing is intended to review the 24-25 budget. And I'm going to go ahead and ask Mr. Bleckschmidt to make a presentation about our budget.
Thank you, President Sproul. Yeah, we have just a few slides that I would like to lead us through just to highlight some of the key elements of the 24-25 fiscal year budget, which largely mirrors our school year. As Dr. Snell alluded to in his superintendent report, this has been a long, arduous process, unfortunately taking a toll on a lot of folks in the process. So I just want to recognize the fact that this has been certainly one of the most, if not the most difficult budget cycles in most of our careers. So with that, we do have the work of approving it as one final act today. So I just wanted to lead through a few, oops, went too far. There we go. So the first thing that we typically talk about, the budget, even though 99% of our discussion and analysis is related to the general fund, the actual budget document that you're being asked to approve tonight actually has multiple funds with very specific purposes. So the general fund is our largest fund, and it contains all of our operating expenses. And again, that's where about 99% of our analysis and discussion resides. Transportation Vehicle Fund is a dedicated fund for the purchase of buses. And again, it's funded by the state through a depreciation cycle. And then Capital Projects Fund is basically the residual of some of our bond work, and then also some impact fee revenues and possible grants that we might have to pursue energy savings and some other projects. Debt Service Fund is strictly dedicated to making payments on our long-term debt. So right now we're in the middle of a bond repayment process that was approved in 2018. So the revenue from that is collected from our taxpayers per their approval on the ballot. And then the payments are made twice a year pursuant to those debt schedules as we sold those bonds. And then the last fund is Associated Student Body. And again, as the name would indicate, that's dedicated strictly to our students' extracurricular activities and co-curricular activities that they're charged with much of the governance over those funds. There are some statutes and policies that apply to that, but largely the day-to-day operations and the budgeting is performed by the students. Student leaders, typically student council or leadership classes at each of our secondary schools. So a second area that we typically focus on as we launch into the general fund, now the rest of these slides will really be focused on the general fund, is enrollment is the driver of our state revenues, the largest driver of our state revenues, I should say. And you can see if you kind of if you're able to read the headings there, the last three columns are the budget for 23-24, the actual for 23-24, and then the budget for 24-25. And you can see that we outperformed. The actual was slightly higher than the budget for 23-24, but unfortunately it was still 336 students less than the prior year's actual. And so we're kind of in this spot where we're luckily flattening out a little bit, but there still are indications that through that attrition that we've talked about, our kindergarten classes being lower than the graduating classes, we still anticipate continued erosion of that enrollment base, at least for another couple of years before hopefully we'll see the bottom and our kindergarten classes will start to return to the previous normals. Another area of focus in that general fund budget is our fund balance. Those are our cash reserves. One of the things that you acted on in your consent agenda was some cash flow instruments that, as we've drawn our fund balance down, it's become problematic at certain points during the fiscal year to meet our monthly cash flow needs. So this is really the origin of those challenges. At our peak, I think we were about $35 million in fund balance. And so now we're sitting there with the almost break-even budget sitting around 14 million. And the other thing that I would, I guess, highlight or emphasize, maybe is a better word, is of the roughly 14 million that we carry in fund balance, you can see some of the restrictions and assignments of that, whether it's outside entities that have a legal claim to future payments that were required to restrict, or it's just best practice to earmark some money internally for things like carryover of grants or building budgets. Really, of the 14 million, somewhere between 2 and 3 million is really the unassigned, totally discretionary fund balance that we have. So that's still a lot of money until you consider that we're about a $420 million budget. It's a pretty tight scenario that we have, but I think we all agree it was necessary to draw down those reserves to meet student needs and staff needs through a very tumultuous time. All right, so the next series of graphs just basically kind of provide a visual of trends around our revenues and some various slices of our expenditures. And so the couple things I would highlight here is, thankfully, on the left-hand side, our local tax revenue has continued to grow. And that's a testament to the support we enjoy from our community and their graciousness at the ballot box in paying their property taxes. State general purpose revenue has largely been flat. And then we see that state special purpose and federal are kind of going in different directions. State special purpose is where largely with special education funding that's increased in that category as a result of legislative actions, as well as more students that are qualifying for services in that program. And then federal special purpose, as you might remember, and we'll see in some of the expenditure slides, that reflects basically the sunsetting of the ESSER funds that we enjoyed through the pandemic. Shifting to expenditures, this particular slice is grouping our expenditures by program type. So segregating basic education from federal stimulus, special education, CTE, and so on. You can see the trends there are, unfortunately, our basic ed took a step back as we've had to rebalance and recalibrate the budget, while our federal stimulus also showed a significant, or it's basically elimination of the federal stimulus funding. Special education continues to increase, as well as some of our special purpose grants. The support services, you might wonder, well, why is that increasing while basic education is decreasing? And again, this is a theme we'll see in almost all of these expenditure slides. Our utilities and our insurance budget went up by almost $3.5 million year over year. And so support services is where those non-discretionary increases are reflected. So if we were to take that $3.5 million out, you would see that we would have a reduction in the support services year over year. Moving into a group of account characteristics called activity groups. And so you can kind of see they're segregated into teaching support, and a couple different admin groups, and then other support services. What I would point to right off the bat is the other support services, which is, I think, the area that grew the most, is again where utilities and insurance are coded on this particular graph. So when you take away the $3.5 million off of a pretty small base there, then I think we would see a pretty significant reduction in other support services. Both building admin and central admin decreased about 0.5%, while teaching went up almost 0.5% or 1/3%. And teaching support showed basically a flat to slight decrease. The last slide of our expenditure trends looks at object codes. So this is where we differentiate our salaries from our contracts and travel, and you can kind of see the categories. Again, the biggest, or one of the biggest gainers there is the contracted services or purchase services. And again, consistent with the theme of insurance and utilities drove that increase. Our salaries unfortunately went down. And then the last thing I'll point out is the supplies and materials. That's an anomaly as well. Our safety net program has grown in size and needs over the last several years pretty dramatically. And we're required now to show offsetting revenues and expenditures. And so since those expenditures are yet to be determined in most cases, we budget them in the supply account. So if you took away safety net, I think we would see the supplies and materials went down as well. Last couple slides before we open it up for public comment or any board questions. We're starting about 4 years ago. Maybe it was longer than that. We've been required by the legislature to not only do a 1-year budget, which I've highlighted some of the key data points, but also we're tasked with crystal ball forecasting 4 years out, which I say kind of intentionally with a snicker because things change so much in our financial variables that really 4 months down the road is a really could present a very different set of circumstances than what we're looking at right now. So 4 years is really it's an exercise, but I don't put a lot of stake in it. But since we're required to do it, we'll do it with diligence. Our plan and forecast for those years, I would just call your attention to the middle row, excess revenues or over expenditures or deficits. So you can see that because our fund balances are so low, we need to hit bottom and start to show that we're getting closer to the board established targets that we're well below right now. And so what this 4-year snapshot demonstrates is we need to rely on fund balance slightly over the next 2 years, but by and large, it's break even budgets. And then we would presume to start making small, slow, methodical increases back to a more appropriate fund balance for a district our size and more consistent with the board targets. The last slide is one that we always share during budget time because again, on the revenue slide, I highlighted the fact that we've enjoyed such support from our local tax base, and that's such a huge part of our budget. And were it not for some of the things that we can talk about on this slide, our reductions and the compromises and sacrifices that were made during this budget cycle would have been much worse. So what this shows is just the tax rates for all of our 3 different levies. And again, focusing on the education and operations, you can see that it was, I would say, artificially low in 2020 because that was when the McCleary initial rules of $1.50 were in place. And then we were able to return it to over $2. And since then it's been kind of dipping down, and then our taxpayers approved for the 2024 a return closer to that $2 figure. Thankfully, while that's kind of gone back and forth, our bond tax rate has pretty consistently dropped. And so the overall tax burden, although it was extremely low in 2023 before the increased education and operations levy was approved, we're still well within or well below, I think, the historical norms prior to 2023. So again, we're very lucky to enjoy that support, but we take it very seriously in trying to be diligent and respectful of how we're managing those rates. So that is all that I have prepared. So I don't know if the board has any questions or comments, and then I don't know if any public has signed up for comment.
So I'll go ahead and ask if there's When we reconvene to the regular board meeting, we can make a motion and then add any board comments at that time. But if there's any board questions, specific questions for Brett, we could go ahead and ask. Okay, are there any signups? There's no signups. Okay, so with that, thank you very much, Brett. We will reconvene to our regular board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve resolution number 922, providing for the 24-25 budget?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, are there any comments or? I just wanted to, Brett, thank you and your team. Director Smith and I, for whatever reason, it's usually Friday evenings in Dr. Snell's office, have spent a lot of time this year, more than most. And I think we had to make a lot of really hard decisions last year in order to come to this budget. And at times that didn't feel comfortable at all. But I think to Brett's point about we've benefited from the generosity of our community, and demonstrating good fiscal health is so critical to the trust and the relationship, the ongoing. So I think, we are partners with our community and we want to continue to be trustworthy partners. And it's important that we maintain good fiscal health. And that sometimes means making really hard decisions. But thank you, Dr. Snell and Brett and your whole team that puts this together. Anything else?
Just building on that trust, the technology capital levy expires. And so we will be working through the fall with you in a public arena to talk about what rate you would like us to go to the ballot in February with. In that slide that Brett shared, it was a 28-cent rate that had been decreasing over the last several years. And so technology, safety, some of those things we've been communicating, polling the community to try to understand what those needs are. And so that's a process that will be at the September, October, and November board meeting with a potential adoption of a resolution for us to put on the ballot in February. So as you saw, it's not as big of a driver as the maintenance and operations levy, but it still isn't a really important one, and one that I know that you don't take lightly, and what that tax rate is, and then what the impact of that rate could do. That levy is separate from our staffing types of decisions, but every dollar helps. So I just wanted to highlight that, and also that overall tax picture that Brett shared. So
Thank you for that reminder. Without any other comments, we will go ahead and move to a vote. Director Barrows? Approve. Director Decker?
Approve.
Director Smith?
Approve.
And I also approve, so our budget passes.
But what about me?
I'm so sorry. Director Zavala. Again, it's been a long day. I'm sorry, Director Zavala.
I also approve.
Excuse me. Okay, so the last item on our agenda is our Board of Directors report. It's been a bit of a quiet summer. I'm not sure if there's activities that anyone has to report on. We've discussed the workshop already.
Just want to remind everyone that we have our General Assembly next month, September 20th and 21st in Seattle, Tacoma area.
Thank you for all your work on that committee. So at this point, we are going to adjourn. We have an executive session tonight. I anticipate 45 minutes. It's for the purpose of discussing it's for personnel for the purpose of discussing the performance of a public employee. No action to follow. Good evening. I am just checking back in to say that we will be in executive session for 15 more minutes, and then I will be back to adjourn the meeting. Okay, we have concluded our executive session for tonight, and our regular board meeting for August is concluded.